Hello, fellow detectives. Welcome to Unlocked, the official podcast for all things Nancy Drew by Her Interactive. I am your host, Tammy Tuckey, and this week we welcome Elizabeth Maxwell, who is a part of our Midnight in Salem new game. So I'm excited to have her on the show. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. I am so excited to be talking with you.
I know a lot of people have been prepping because, we see some of the art of the characters and then also art of the backgrounds, which are looking wonderful. So we only have a limited amount of information. But with that limited amount of information, I think that's kind of beneficial because, of course, it's a mystery. But I thought it would be great to talk first about how you know about the character of Nancy or the Hardy Boys, because they're also involved in the game. So what kind of brought you into the Nancy universe originally?
It's so interesting. I don't think that I know any girls my age that didn't read Nancy Drew books growing up. I was lucky enough. I went to a school that had a small little school library that was heavily stocked with the original kind of Nancy Drew mystery stories. And it's funny, in preparation for our interview, I just kind of went back and was browsing through the different story titles and the cover art. And it's kind of crazy, how much came rushing back. I can still remember, perusing through the bookshelves and pulling out the mystery at Lilac Inn and, oh gosh, there was one with a clock. I think it was number 1, the secret of the old clock. So I read the books growing up. I loved them. And I don't know how I missed that they did video games based on Nancy Drew, because point and click adventure games are actually some of my favorite games to play. So I'm a little late to the party that Her Interactive has been throwing for decades now, but I am so glad to be here now.
Yeah, well, welcome to that party. Are you starting to play through all the games then?
I kind of want Midnight in Salem to be my first.
Ooh,
so
okay.
I'm going to wait for Midnight in Salem to come out, and then I think I'll maybe go back through some of the older ones afterwards.
You should work backwards. Start with Midnight and literally go backwards. I think Midnight's 34 or 33. Yeah, and work your way backwards because you'll definitely see a change in animation, but the stories are always so thrilling and the characters are always very unique. So that would be really cool to hear what you have to say about the games as you go backward.
Yeah, I love that idea, actually. And I mean, I grew up, I don't want to age myself too much, but, I grew up when graphics were still very much, evolving. So I don't mind games that have more simplistic graphics. I'm much more focused on the story and the characters usually.
We're on the same boat there, so don't worry about it. It's not going to age you at all. There's a lot of us. I think that most of the fans of Her Interactive are all around our age anyways, because we literally grew up playing these games, and so they're so nostalgic for us. And reading the books too. Obviously, Nancy is such a drawing character, as you said. So when you read the audition call, did it say specifically it was for a Nancy Drew game?
It did not. I have found in the voiceover world, and actually particularly with video games, they really try and, protect their secrets. They don't want stuff to get leaked. And so everything was, all the characters were given different names. The title had a code name. And in retrospect, I don't know how I didn't guess that it was Nancy Drew, because I remember thinking oh, this kind of reminds me a little bit of the Nancy Drew books. But as I mentioned, I don't know how. I wasn't aware of the video game, so I didn't make the connection until I literally came in for my first recording session.
And when they cast you, do they give you any other additional information, or when you walked through the door to record, that's when you got the bulk of the story?
Um, I was called by my agent, and they told me the character that I had booked, and they did tell me my agent, I could tell, was a big fan of Nancy Drew too, because she was so excited when she told me. She was like, "You're working on the new Nancy Drew game." So we're given kind of a basic outline of the character's personality, and kind of their strengths and weaknesses. And I knew a little bit about the plot overall, but it's not until we actually got into the recording studio with the director and with the writers that they really kind of, fleshed everything out for me. And it was nice. We had plenty of time in the beginning to really talk about the characters and talk about, the plots and the arcs. And I could just tell that they were very invested in the quality of the story. And as an actor, that's always so nice.
Oh, it's a big plus, because then you have that support while you're doing the recording session, and then know that you've got the character that they are looking for that game too.
Mm-hmm.
What's her name that you're playing?
My character is Teegan Parris, older sister of May Parris.
And what did they tell you overall about her specific character? Something maybe a little bit you could tell our audience.
So she is very much a warm, maternal kind of character. She's very concerned and protective with her younger sister, who's kind of had a little bit more of a troubled dark past. And Teegan is a little bit more of what I would maybe consider like the class president type personality, a little bit more of the, type A. And like I said, very, very loving, protective with her younger sister. And she runs the local museum in Salem that covers Salem history, the history of, the witch trials and so forth. And they described her as being a really warm, lovely, kind, hospitable person that's very invested in trying to do what she can to right the injustices of what happened during the Salem witch trials.
So did you do any research on Salem, or did you learn something from the dialogue that you had received about the Salem witch trials that you didn't know about?
I actually studied the Salem witch trials a decent amount in school. I would not say that I have a professor's intense knowledge of it, but I was very interested in it, and I took it upon myself when I was in school to do quite a bit of research and reading on it. So I don't think it was necessarily required of me by the Her Interactive team, but I kind of walked into that role already having, I'd say, an above average, knowledge of the Salem witch trials and kind of I guess I would say what the atrocities that occurred during that time.
Was there anything, do you remember in your research that you found surprising that you think maybe our listeners would be interested in knowing about the trials?
Ooh, that's a great question. I just remember finding it so interesting, the kind of clash between, the more, I guess, traditional kind of like earth and nature based ways that people had of viewing the world, of viewing health, of viewing the body, of viewing how you treat illness and so forth. All of these things that were very rooted in Native American traditions and Celtic traditions and so forth. And how those kind of clashing with the newer kind of Western religions and Christianity that was, surging into America through, the Pilgrims and the pioneers and stuff. I just remember finding that to be particularly interesting. And I actually learned quite a bit more about, I guess what they would call like pagan forms of healing and medicine. And I just remember finding all of that really fascinating. I'm trying to think of there are any detailed specifics. If something pops up while we're talking, I'll just blurt it out.
How long did it take the process of recording your part?
Oh, goodness. I'm trying to think. We managed to do it all in one long day, where they just scheduled me kind of back to back hours. I want to say that it was a total of 4 hours of recording, I think. Yeah. If my memory serves, it was 4 hours of back to back recording. When you're going through a narrative story that's like has arcs that's progressing, at least it really keeps your brain engaged. There's a lot of like intellectual and emotional engagement versus, doing VO where you're just like repeating, lines like move to the right, move to the left, fire to the right, fire to the left. Those can get a bit mind numbing if you've got 4 hours of that. But when there's a nice narrative, it's a bit easier.
What did you think about like the other character designs, and did that help make an impression on some of the lines that you had to deliver?
Absolutely. I love as an actor being given any and all information about any and all things in the game that I can. I think it just adds more colors to your palette, and I feel like, of course, in the written descriptions of the characters, there's a lot of information, but there's a lot of kind of emotional stuff that can come through and just seeing how the artist portrayed the character. And it's kind of fun to look at the characters through my character's eyes, because how Teegan would view these characters is going to be really different from how like Elizabeth would view them. So yeah, it's nice to have a little bit of time to kind of like have a visual representation of the other characters and muse on that.
Were you able to ever kind of ad lib on lines?
Not too much. Her interactive was pretty clear on the script that they had created and, how they wanted the story to flow. There were a couple of times where I did say like, I feel like Teegan might say it this way instead. And we were able to have like a little bit of a dialogue and tweak some things. But it wasn't, the session was not full of wild improv. It was honestly a real pleasure. It was so obvious from the first couple of minutes of the session that they care really deeply about this franchise and these games. And there's a lot of love. There's a lot of attention to detail. There's a lot of thought put into every aspect of the story and the game. And my job as an actor is to do the best that I can do regardless of the circumstances, but being put in an environment like that just makes the experience so much richer and makes my job so much easier. And knowing that, there wasn't a question that I had that they didn't have a beautiful, detailed, answer and response for. And it just allows me to give a much more rich and nuanced performance.
So when you're jumping into recording and everything, was there anything specifically that you had thought about? Like, because it's so hard to discuss the game without, talking about spoilers or specific moments in the game itself. But it sounds like you have to give a performance that can be very subjective. How are you able to do that?
Well, it is subjective, but it's a subjectivity that includes the opinions of the writer, the director, the producer, and myself. So it's never a character or a performance that's created solely by me. It's always in conjunction, with the other creators in the room. So it's almost as if we all create the bones of the character together. And then my job as an actor is to create like the flesh and the hair and really find the details that I specifically can bring to the character because of my understanding of her and my life experiences and so forth. And so for me with Teegan, she was a great character for me to play because I actually felt like I could really relate to her quite a bit from my own personal experiences. And kind of knowing like what her outer shell that she, presents to the world versus what's going on inside. I felt like I really had a good grasp of that with her.
How did you kind of come into the voiceover industry to begin with?
I've been an actor for many, many years, more so with on camera and theatrical work. And I moved to Austin, Texas from LA about 7 years ago, I think. And I knew that I needed to kind of be a little bit more open to how I was going to act and be a part of the entertainment industry and so forth. Because while Austin does have a film and TV scene, obviously nothing really compares to LA, And I was very vocal about this with my friends. I like to bounce ideas and brainstorm with, the people that I trust. And a lot of them were like, you play video games, you watch anime, you've had all this acting training and you have a good voice. Why don't you do voiceover? And it was like one of those like being hit by lightning moments where it's like, how did I never think of this before? This is seemingly an obvious path that I should investigate. And so it was just an immediate and strong yes for me. I did a bunch of research. I put together a demo reel and started aggressively marketing myself to all the companies within a certain radius of Austin that I knew would hire voice actors. And I got some yeses, and yeses lead to more yeses. And here I am.
When you think about Nancy, what do you think about the character overall as a person?
Nancy's always been one of those characters that I feel like to me, growing up was a wonderful representation of femininity, she and what you could be as a woman. It's like she was independent, she was strong, she was fearless, but she still had a lot of like poise and grace, and she was intelligent. And it was like she took all these varying, what some people might see as kind of opposite ends of the spectrum sort of characteristics, and she combined them all into one package. And I just remember when I was little thinking that, being a woman sleuth has got to be like the coolest job in the world. And she did it well, and she did it with poise. And Nancy Drew's always been a pretty cool female role model, I think.
And since the fans have been waiting for this game for quite some time, and they're just really excited and pumped, is there anything you want to say specifically to them about this game?
Well, as I said, I can't compare it to older games because I haven't played them, but I can tell you that I personally am very excited to play this game. And that is not always the case with all video games that I work on. So I know from what I've heard that all the fans have been waiting quite a while for this game. And I really do feel like her interactive is going to make that patience and that time, they're going to reward the fans for it.
Well, to end our interview, I have one last question for you, which is, if you could describe your experience working for Her Interactive and being a part of the Nancy Drew universe with Midnight in Salem with one word, what word would that be?
My first instinct was to say like eye-opening, because I really feel like it's reintroduced me into the world of Nancy Drew and opened my eyes to huge aspects of the character and the universe that I wasn't aware of. So yeah, eye-opening.